This time and taxpayer dollars, an empty resolution that does absolutely nothing. We do have a problem at the border, and there is legislation that Congress could pass right now that would make major investments in border security and enforcement. But House Republicans and the former president are blocking that legislation. They do not want to find solutions for the border. This resolution is a waste of our time and another embarrassing exercise for the Republican majority. We had this exact same conversation in our last rules meeting. If House Republicans care about the border, bring up the national security supplemental that the Senate already passed with 70 votes. We could have that bill signed into law by the end of this week. The supplemental would hire thousands of Border Patrol and Customs CBP agents and make infrastructure improvements on the southern border, really desperately needed infrastructure improvements. These investments would improve enforcement, speed up processing, and combat fentanyl trafficking, and provide critical aid to our allies. If Republicans care about immigration, if they care about the border, and if they care about our national security, they should stop wasting time and call up the National Security Supplemental for a vote. Ms. Jayapal, what does this bill do? Does it fund anything? Does it do anything?
It does absolutely nothing. It is simply a resolution that tries to make a political point without putting forward a single solution. And it's the second that we've had in just a couple of months.
Okay, that was my impression. Thank you for clarifying. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I would like to thank you, Congressman Van Drew, for pointing out the difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration, because I think we like to blur that, or the other side likes to blur that and doesn't recognize that there is a legal way to enter the country. And through the border, illegally crossing the border is not it. And just doing a little bit of math, my understanding is there's about 1/3 of those illegal border crossings are not at the Mexico-U.S. border. Am I doing that right?
Congresswoman, that's correct. I believe that's the correct number, or thereabouts, yes.
Thereabouts. Well, I represent the northern border in Minnesota, and I know that there are folks coming across there illegally. And so it's not just, I mean, it is important that we secure the border, incredibly important. And so when we talk about every district being a border district, I know what it's like. I mean, they are coming across that northern border from Canada, because what they're saying is it's easier to get into Canada, and then they can come across, and it's very rural or densely, wooded, things like that. So I understand the issue of that, and I really, really do appreciate you bringing this forward, because I think it is important that we keep talking about it. Because the people in my district are talking about, people across the country are talking about it, and they need to understand where the solution is. And this lays it out. These are, when Congressman Reschenthaler asked about, the executive orders that could be done. This could be taken care of, and I appreciate the fact that you brought this forward and that you are pointing out what can be done, and there is a solution to illegal immigration. And so,
Congresswoman, I appreciate your statement, and you make a good point for folks to realize that may or may not be watching this, but the northern border is under assault as well. It is dangerous. And remember, these people, as you know, I don't have to tell you, are not coming from Canada. They're coming from every corner of the earth. We don't know what they're up to, what they're doing, some of them. And by the way, we didn't even speak about the tens of thousands of Chinese nationals, some of whom, without doubt, have a connection to the Chinese Communist Party, and they're coming in up north too. So thank you.
Yep, and I appreciate you bringing this forward, because we have to address the illegal immigration before we can address legal immigration. So thank you very much, Congressman. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
I thank the chairman and thank both the witnesses for their testimony. It does feel like Groundhog Day or deja vu, I suppose, with respect to this hearing and the subject matter, given that we've basically wasted, 6 months, 7 months in this committee debating resolutions that have no impact on public policy, that change absolutely nothing on the ground. But for whatever reason, apparently, the House Republican majority has decided this is how they will choose to spend their time, to squander their majority by essentially having, as the ranking member articulated so well, press releases repackaged as resolutions. The gentlewoman made the comment just a few moments ago that we need to keep talking about this. No one is stopping her or other members from talking about this. You're welcome to give a floor speech, to spend time in committee, to issue press releases, to go on television, to talk about any public policy issue that you choose to talk about. What we are simply saying is that this is not a prudent use of the time of the Rules Committee or of the United States Congress to debate a resolution that changes nothing. It feels like I'm in the twilight zone. Mr. Van Drew, thank you for being here. I guess, can you clarify for me, simply, what does this resolution do? Here, better question. Does the resolution change any policy of the United States government?
What the resolution does is lay out the policy that it should exist, and most importantly, the actions that President Biden could take. It's fully within his power to take. We need to remind people of that. And my hope against hope is that each time we do this, and I'll get done real quick, that each time we do it, that just maybe Chuck Schumer will listen and post H.R. 2.
Okay, so I understand what you'd like to see happen, and I appreciate your answer, and I hope you'll be candid. The answer is this resolution does not include any provision that changes the policy of the federal government, of the Department of Homeland Security, or any apparatus of the federal government. Or am I wrong? Point me to the provision in this resolution that you brought before this committee that changes United States policy.
This resolution lays out
Mr.
lots
Van Drew.
of policies. We already did a bill that does that, and the Senate won't do it. So
Understood.
we're going to do
So this
bill
resolution
that
does
say
not
we
do
need
that.
to do this.
Is that,
There's an important point here, Congressman.
I understand.
The
Let me
Senate-
reclaim my time, Mr. Van Drew, because here's the thing, and I've given you.
You have to let me
I've
answer.
given you ample time. I'm going to give you a chance to respond. Okay. What I am simply suggesting, you have made the case. I understand why you've decided to bring this resolution forward, right? I guess what I'm asking you is a very simple question about whether or not the resolution changes any policy implemented by the Department of Homeland Security. I believe you're on the committee. You're on the Homeland Security Committee.
I'm
Are you
not Congressman.
any
I'm on
longer?
Judiciary.
You previously served on the Homeland Security Committee.
Years ago, yes,
Right?
Congressman.
And you certainly understand the function of resolutions. I don't think it's a stretch for you to simply concede that this resolution doesn't change policy. I understand what you'd like to see happen. This resolution does not do that. If it passes the House in 2 days when it's brought to the floor, it will not change policy implemented by the Department of Homeland Security. Do you deny that?
What I say and won't deny is that a good resolution can influence good policy, legislation, and certainly actions by a president.
All right. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is what it is. If you're unwilling to concede that, I guess I don't really understand why you wouldn't just make an intellectually honest argument and say, you know what? Yes, of course, this resolution, it's a resolution. It does not change policy, but we're hopeful that the Biden administration will change policy based on the resolution that we proposed. That would seem to be an honest
Congressman,
answer,
there are
but-
many Democratic resolutions, and you
Understood.
consider them worthy, and you have voted for many of those
I'm asking you
Democratic
about the
resolutions.
one that is before this committee that is a carbon copy of the resolution that was brought before this committee 2 months ago that you all spent time on the floor voting on. So, you know, you can make your argument. I will simply say the American people can read this resolution. It's not particularly long. They can glean for themselves whether or not it will change any element of American policy or law, whether or not it makes any appropriation to address some of the issues on our southern border. They understand. It's, again, I would encourage anybody who'd like to read the resolution, who wants to understand how the Republican Party in the House of Representatives intends to address
Congressman,
this
would you-
problem. Sir, I'm not asking you a question. I'm making a statement that I would encourage anybody who's watching this hearing and who is interested in better understanding the Republican proposal for addressing the issues on our southern border to read the resolution, because they will find a document that provides no change in policy, that addresses none of the funding needs. And by the way, as the ranking member, as my colleague from Pennsylvania and others have articulated, there are, in fact, bipartisan, consensus-driven solutions that have been proposed in the United States Senate, as well as here in this chamber, that the Republican caucus refuses to take up. So that's a choice you've made. I understand the political and electoral decisions that you all are making in terms of attempting to elevate this as something that will inure to your benefit politically. That's your choice. I don't think at the end of the day, the voters and the people in our country, the citizens, are going to be satisfied with it. I think they'd like to see us actually try to solve problems instead of passing non-binding resolutions. And I wish that we could get back to doing the former instead of spending so much time on the latter. I yield back, Mr.
Congressman, may I
Chairman.
answer that for very briefly?
It wasn't a question.
I know you
but
got to
welcome
go.
Sure.
I'd simply say.
By all means, go ahead.
May I
Yes.
ask you a question? I don't know if that's appropriate. Would
I'm
you
not
then-
answering your questions.
Okay.
I'm asking you
It's
questions.
it
It's not how the
sounds
Rules
like-
Committee works,
because it
Mr. Van
sounds-
Drew.
I know, but you
I would
sounds
ask
like.
the two gentlemen, please don't talk over one another again.
Congressman, one sentence. Sounds like to me that you're advocating that there be no more Democratic or Republican resolutions.
Mr. Van Drew,
If they're totally
what-
useless, then why should we do them on either side?
What I am
yield back.
suggesting, well, a couple of things. I'd say, one, to the extent that you'd like to identify that resolution that supposedly was a waste of time that Democrats proposed 13 months ago when we were in the majority, by all means, you can do so. Do you have an example of that? Sounds like you don't. So you're in the majority. You decide how ultimately to allocate floor time, and you have chosen to spend your time on these resolutions. And by the way, I mean, maybe we'll hear this from some of my colleagues I'm not going to engage in a colloquy avoid the temptation here to do so, and we'll let my colleagues address this in their own time. But I can't imagine, for those who are particularly passionate about their worldview as it relates to solutions to address some of the issues on our southern border, that they really want to spend their time debating non-binding resolutions either. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this is how you all would like to spend your time, but I don't think the American people had this in mind, and I'll yield to the ranking member.
Yeah, let me just say for the record, for the two people who are watching this, that about resolutions, some resolutions actually do some stuff, right? I mean, we pass rules that are resolutions, and they make an order bills to be considered on the House floor, so there's a useful function to that. But your resolution doesn't make an order anything. And by the way, most resolutions that we deal with, a lot of times they don't come before the Rules Committee, and they go right to the House floor because they're just basic statements of whatever. And again, I think the concern that has been raised here is that this is not the first time we've had a resolution like this before us. And it seems that we keep on having resolutions when we really believe that we should be working in a bipartisan way to actually bring solutions. And I get it, Mr. Goose pointed out, that there may be political and electoral issues that you guys are concerned with as why we're not doing that. But I think the American people actually want us to get stuff done around here. But anyway, I thank the gentleman for yielding. I yield back.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. A gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have for the panel.
Well, I'm hearing a very robust argument for having no resolutions in front of the House of Representatives from the other side of the aisle. And I believe if you look this up, I've probably voted against more resolutions than anybody on this committee and anybody in Congress. And that's because I read them, though, not because I don't believe they shouldn't exist. I mean, there is a purpose for resolutions. Unless it's concurrent resolution or joint resolution with the Senate and then signed by the president, it doesn't become a law, doesn't have the force of law, yet we bring them up every day. The other side of the aisle has sponsored a lot of resolutions this Congress. So I think all of that discussion, though, about the complaining that this is a resolution is because they don't want to talk about what's in the resolution. And there's some very inconvenient truths in this resolution. And particularly when you contrast it with the president's State of the Union last week. He presented to us, basically a campaign speech, but he presented to us that he couldn't do anything, that there was nothing else he could do. Yet in this resolution, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 things here in the whereas clause that he could do tomorrow or today. That he's not doing. So I think we should be measured in the number of resolutions we pass and in the number of post offices we name. But this is a particularly important resolution because we've tried to pass a law that would do something. The Senate won't bring it up. We've passed that here in the House, and they just won't bring it up. So Mr. Van Drew, do you believe that the president could end the catch and release policy?
Yes, Congressman, I do.
Ms. Jayapal, do you think he could?
Mr. Massey, I've already gone through all the reasons why these things don't work. The fact is that
I
after...
wasn't here for that, but could you tell me, could the president end the catch and release policy?
If you're talking about the mandatory detention statutes of the INA, there is no administration, including the Trump administration, that has ever complied with that because no Congress has ever appropriated the extraordinary levels of funding.
Could
If
he
you're talking
reinstate?
about...
Could he reinstate the migrant protection protocols?
The Remain in Mexico program was actually stopped by, thank you.
Could he or could he not?
It was actually in effect, and I wanted to mention this actually before when Mr. Van Drew was talking about the effectiveness of the MPP program. The question here is, was it effective? So from January of 2019...
that was not my question. My question is, could he do it?
But I think the question is, why would he do it, Mr. Massey?
So you're
why
saying
would he do it?
can?
Because the January of 2019...
I've got a bunch of questions.
I know, but Mr. Van Drew was given time when he
Again,
was...
I would
reclaiming
just
my
ask
time.
that
when
the
he
witness
was-
and
Yeah, I want to reclaim my
do
time.
not talk over one another.
So it sounds like he could, but you don't think it would be effective. Could he enter into asylum cooperative agreements?
Well, it depends what the agreements say.
So maybe he could. Could he end abuses of parole authority?
Mr. Massey, what you're asking is, could he do things? And what I would like to talk about is what happened when Donald Trump did those things. That is what you all don't want to talk about. Even Migration Protection Program, the Remain in Mexico program, under Donald Trump, over 1.4 million people were encountered at the southern border. And you know how many times Donald Trump put migrants into the Remain in Mexico program? Only 70,000 people were placed. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm just saying when you talk about these things that Donald Trump did and say they were so effective, they weren't effective.
Well, let's look at the numbers. You said there were 1.4 million encounters under Trump. How many under Biden?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I would just remind you that that was during COVID. So when Mr. Van Drew talks about how the numbers went down, during COVID, flights were not coming to the United States. People were not traveling around the world. There was a significant reduction in migrants across the world moving during COVID.
Glad you brought up flights. Should we be paying for flights for illegal immigrants?
Well, I don't know what flights you're paying for, Mr. Massey.
And how many, I asked you about encounters at the border, which you didn't know, which is fine. I don't have these off the top of my head either under Biden, but it is in the resolution how many, looks like 9.3 million. How many have, according to the border control, how many have come into the country under Joe Biden?
Well, I assume you have that number in front of you.
Over 7 million, according to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Do you dispute that?
What I would like to say is that the numbers when these harsh policies were instituted under Donald Trump went up and not down. And as we have taken away the ability for people to have legal pathways to come to the United States, and as the situations around the world have changed, as climate change has increased, as countries have been dealing with their own issues, you have seen an increased flow, which is part of the reason we say, if you want to deal with this, then let's deal with the issues in sending countries.
Is climate change a legitimate asylum claim?
No, it is not.
Is
climate
seeking
change
better
real?
wages a legitimate asylum claim?
Is climate change real?
Yeah, changes all the time.
And do you think that the threats of climate change around the world are real?
I think that you have, I'm not picking on you, but I think that the people who say that it's anthropogenic really have no idea what our contribution to the climate is. And if they did, they could predict what the climate change would be, and they've failed to
think
do
that
that.
greenhouse gases are helping to create climate change? Do you think it's man-made?
Well, I'm glad we're having a science discussion. I'll go here any day of the week.
I'm just
Because
trying
I know-
to
I
point
know-
out to you that there are a lot of things that
Because
you all
do
say
you
that aren't
think-
true.
Do you think that crops do better with CO2, more CO2 in the air?
I think that we should make sure that we're helping to use regenerative agriculture and.
Do you want to answer that question that I just asked?
I mean, I'm happy to have that discussion with you, but I think that the issue here is
Let's have it.
let's talk about why people are coming.
What's
to
the
this
ideal
country.
concentration of CO2 for
Mr.
plants?
Massey, I'm not going to have that discussion with you.
But you brought it up and said you'd be happy to have it.
Not in this forum. What I'd like to
Okay.
do is have
Well,
a
then
conversation
don't-
about why
then-
people are coming.
Well, you're
to
the one who
United
brought up
States.
climate change as if it were a legitimate asylum
you-
claim. So I asked you if it's a legitimate asylum claim, and you said it's
It's a legitimate
not.
reason for migration, absolutely.
But is it a legitimate, should we accept illegal immigrants because their climate is changing?
Mr. Massey, if you understood the immigration system, you would know that there are different categories for people to be able to come to the United States to apply. There is an asylum category, there's a refugee category, there is a category for employment, there is a category
Well, I'm
for
not-
being with family, and there are a number of reasons that drive
Which is
people
the,
to come to the
but
United
you,
States.
which one is the category that allows them to break into our country illegally because the climate has changed where they live?
Mr. Massey, I don't think that people are breaking into the country illegally, and I just want to say, I think, looking around the room, that I might be the only person who has actually gone through the legal immigration system. And when people differentiate between legal immigration and illegal immigration, the undertone from your side is that somehow people who are coming illegally are trying to break into the country, that are trying to do something wrong, when in fact it took me 17 years to go through the legal immigration system, and I am not disparaging of people who are trying to come to this country for all the reasons that drive people to come to the
Well,
United States.
I did notice in your statement that you talked about illegal border crossing, so at least you acknowledge that it's illegal, and you're willing to use the word illegal in characterizing their activity, are you not?
Well, sure, of course.
So it's
Once you-
illegal for them to cross the border?
The act of crossing the border, if you are apprehended within a certain radius of the border, is considered an illegal act. That is correct.
And can you give me some other examples of asylum claims or refugee claims that aren't legitimate? Or is every claim legitimate?
No, there's very specific asylum law, and you have
Which ones are not legitimate claims?
You have to meet the standards that are defined by asylum law. And by the way, a refugee is a status that's accorded when you're outside of the country versus an asylum seeker who comes to the border to claim asylum.
If we were
Those
able
are
to
two different
intercept,
categories
okay,
by
if we
law.
were able to intercept everybody who's trying to enter this country illegally, and you acknowledge when they cross that border, that is an illegal act, so they are breaking the law. If we were able to apprehend every single one of them, and they all claim that they're refugees or they're seeking asylum, are there any that you would reject for those claims, and under what reasons?
Well, first of all, it is legal to seek asylum at the border.
Okay.
It is legal
Which ones
to
would
seek
you
asylum.
reject?
It is legal to seek asylum at the border. So not everybody who comes to the border and crosses is immediately engaged in an illegal act. But there are people who are not seeking asylum who come and cross the border, and if they're apprehended within a certain radius of the border, then that's considered.
If they tell you they're seeking asylum, would you at least give them a proceeding?
You have to have a proceeding. You
So,
have to go through at least a determination, yes.
so it seems to me like most of them that come across have been trained to say the word asylum. And then at that point, your policy would be to believe that that they should be
You have to determine
considered.
whether or not they have a legitimate asylum claim.
Okay, in that
is international
determination-
human rights law.
In that determination, what would you use to deny them asylum? What are
There
the,
is a very specific process and very specific metrics that you have to meet. one of the challenges and one of the reasons President Biden asked for more asylum officers and more immigration judges is so that people could actually have their claims heard and they could actually go through the process quickly, because right now we don't have enough. And so if you're interested in having people be assessed and their claims be processed quickly, then the best thing to do would be to add immigration judges and asylum officers so that you could actually get those claims heard. And when people are given the determination, they generally leave.
I hope you
So-
feel like I'm giving you enough time.
I do now.
Okay.
Yes.
Should they be, if they're seeking asylum and they commit a crime, should they be detained?
Well, right now, I mean, if there's, it depends on what status they're in. These are technical questions that a lot of it depends on what status they're in.
I feel like they should be detained. Do you support building a wall?
I do not think that a wall is going to solve our problems, no.
Do a majority of your, how would you characterize the position of your party? Does it generally support building a wall or not?
I think the position of our party is we should have comprehensive, humane immigration reform that modernizes the immigration system so that we can have an orderly process for people to be able to be with their families and contribute to our economy.
So not building a wall. Let me just focus on one other small set of questions. I appreciate everybody's indulgence and patience here. Are you aware that when somebody is here illegally, or maybe they say they're seeking asylum or they're a refugee or whatever their claim is, but they're not a citizen, that they are counted in the census and that is used to allocate seats in the House of Representatives? Like the population of people who are not here legally is used to be counted in the census and in the apportionment of representatives.
Yes, every single person in this country is counted.
So even the illegal immigrants are counted.
Every person in this country is counted, and that is according to our Constitution.
Should illegal, I don't think our founding fathers foresaw this situation, and I have sponsored a constitutional amendment to remedy this. But should illegal immigrants be counted for the purposes of apportioning representatives of the House or the Electoral College?
If you're suggesting that people who have undocumented status should not count for the work that they do and the contributions that they make to this country, I would say absolutely I do not agree with that. I think every person should count and is important to be counted.
Counted for what, though? Should they be able to vote?
Well, you know, there used to be places that did allow people to vote in local elections, school board elections and things like that. But
should they be able to vote in presidential races or in the House or for representatives here in the House of
I
Representatives?
think the question is, how do we treat the people that pick our foods, are on the front lines of our healthcare crisis, are doing the farm work that we need done, are serving us in numerous ways, are doctors, lawyers, contributors to our economy, and yet are unable to get legal immigration status because Congress and Republicans in Congress over decades have refused to fix the immigration system so that we can just continue to talk about immigrants as if somehow they don't contribute and they're a drain on our economy. The CBO just came out with a study that showed that the unexpected migration into this country contributed $7 trillion to our GDP, $1 trillion more in revenues than was expected. But I never hear anybody on your side ever talk about that. All we hear is about the drain on our economy and how immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, are so terrible. I'd love to hear you talk about the contributions.
The great thing about this committee is I don't have a 5-minute counter. Now, my colleagues may not agree. So what I get to do is ask you the same question again until you answer it or until it becomes painfully obvious that you won't. Should people here who are not citizens be allowed to vote for president or be allowed to vote for U.S. representatives?
I think there are many places that are considering local elections and people being able to weigh in, for example, on school board elections. And
So-
I think that that's appropriate.
So let me ask the question again, because I don't have a 5-minute timer. Should people who are not citizens of the United States be able to vote?
am not
in the
advocating
president?
for-
Please don't talk over me, and I'll give you the same courtesy. Should people who are not citizens of the United States be allowed to vote in the for president or for members of the House of Representatives?
Are you including legal permanent residents as well as undocumented immigrants?
I'm including, and I would like you in your answer to include asylum seeker, people who say they're seeking asylum, people who have crossed the border illegally and we don't know they're here, and people who claim to be refugees but are not citizens. Should they be allowed to vote
You know,
in the presidential race or for a
I
race for
am not
U.S. House of
at this
Representatives?
point for that, but I do think we should think about how we ensure that people, for example, are legal permanent residents. I was a legal permanent resident for quite some time for a variety of circumstances, even though technically you should be able to become a citizen when you're after 5 years. But I do think that there's a place to think about different categories of people being able to make their voice heard in our democracy, but I'm not advocating for undocumented immigrants to be able to vote in congressional or presidential elections.
Now, let me get to my original question that I'm trying to get to, or where I started, is should that population of people be counted toward the apportionment of representatives? So, for instance, there are probably at least 6 extra representatives for the state of California because of the policy that non-citizens are counted not just in the census, but they're also counted toward apportionment of representatives for the House and also for the Electoral College. There are only 6 representatives in total for the state of Kentucky. So there are more people in the state of California who are not citizens, who are counted for the Electoral College and counted for the apportionment of representatives than there are in the state of Kentucky. Do you think that is fair or something that we should continue doing?
I think that every person deserves to be counted, yes.
But for a presidential vote,
I believe that everybody deserves to be counted for our census, and that is the rules around how our census is determined. I mean, if you want to talk about, we can also get into the Electoral College and how your state has 2 senators, but a giant state like California also has 2 senators. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which we can talk about fairness or what's perceived as fairness in our electoral system.
Mr. Van Drew, do you think that illegal immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers should be counted toward the apportionment of representatives in this House of Representatives?
No, I don't. And there are those, and quite frankly, in confidence, those that are on the other side of the aisle of me who said that a major reason this is all occurring is because it will shift what happens with the census, which will affect the congressional apportionment, which will affect the Electoral College as well. And my person who told me that, who's a friend, and again, I would never mention his name, said, we are going to get to the point that we're bulletproof. You will never be able to win an election again.
And this was somebody on the other side of the aisle talking to you.
Yes, and you'll never find out who it is.
Well, that's fine.
Man, would they be in trouble.
No, I appreciate that you're not disclosing that person, but when I try to find out why do Democrats and Republicans see this so differently? Why is it that we will all with ease vote for this resolution because it's just full of common sense and things that a majority of the Americans support, and then it that's in the whereas clause, and then it resolves things that the president can do that he's not doing. So I look for what is the difference? Why would people from blue states be so adamant that this is not a problem or that these are not fixes or that it's not fixable when in fact it is? And the one thing I keep coming back to is in the census, not only do we count illegal immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers, but they count toward the Electoral College. And this predominantly helps the blue states. And so they don't even need to get them to vote, although we've heard they would let them vote in some races, maybe not others. That is a magnet. That is a magnet. That is a reason. Now you have a political reason, and I think we're getting to the crux of why the other side is rejecting this resolution. If it doesn't do anything, it should be easy for them to vote for. But the reality is it does something. It puts a fine point on what the president said at the State of the Union, the things that he said which are not true. And it shows that this president could do a lot to fix the border tomorrow, and he's not. And so I appreciate both of your time, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she cares to ask the panel.
Thank you so much, Chairman. And thank you so much, Representative Jayapal, for having such a commonsensical response to that line of questioning. Because I want to point out to the gentleman from Kentucky, even though he has left now, that the top 3 states with the largest unauthorized immigration populations include Texas and Florida. Are you leaving, Mr. Massey? I think it's really important to get to that. If you're saying we are doing this for some kind of reason regarding the Electoral College, that doesn't make any sense when you have Texas that had 1.6 million immigrant populations that was undocumented, Florida with 900,000, Nevada and Texas, Nevada, a purple state, had the highest shares of unauthorized, undocumented immigrants. Why? Because they are doing essential and important work in these economies. And I think that's the point that Representative Jayapal, you were trying to make over and over again, is that because we don't have these legal pathways that are bipartisan, like the Modernization Act, right? The Farm Worker Modernization Act, to make sure that those people coming from places that are sending, because of the climate crisis, which is real, and we have people who are leaving agrarian sectors because they can no longer grow crops because the sun is too hot and there is no water. Doesn't matter how much CO2 might be helping those plants. So when there's no water, they can't grow them. But we could use them here. And they are coming here. They're coming to places like Arkansas. They're working in the poultry plants. They are all over the place. So I think that pointing out the fact that it is not true, as I keep hearing on the other side, that we don't want to do anything about this. Quite the contrary. We have bills that are bipartisan that we pass that don't get taken up, that Republicans undermine. In fact, there are bills that maybe I don't agree with that make it through that we've all talked about, that they don't want to take up. Instead, we do non-binding resolutions. It is the nothing burger. It is nada, right? No hay enchilada, no hay nada. There is nothing here. There isn't even a tasty enchilada. I'm going to yield to my ranking member.
No, and I'm sorry the gentleman from Kentucky left, because maybe he's looking at a different bill than I am. I've been looking for the word census and congressional apportionment in this bill, and I don't see it. So I don't know, in this committee you can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but I don't see it in this bill at all. And again, I just will take issue with him as to why we have different perspectives on this. We actually want to solve the problem. I think my Republican friends want to keep the issue alive. We actually believe that immigrants who come to this country are human beings. We would never say that they poison the blood of our country. That's the difference. So I'm sorry the gentleman left, but again, there's nothing in this non-binding resolution that doesn't do anything. It even mentions census or congressional apportionment. So I just wanted to say that for the record. I thank the gentlelady. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And just the ludicrousness of the idea that we're going to be against a resolution that does nothing but have mistruth and misrepresentation. And I think it comes back to what our job is. Our job's to write laws, right? And when you have a law like H.R. 2, which keeps coming up, that goes over to the other side, because it takes being passed on both sides before you get it to the president. I don't know if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't realize that, but it went over there. And it failed twice. And it failed not because Democrats voted against it. That's because Republicans voted against it. It failed twice, 46 to 51 the first time, and then 32 to 58. So you had Republicans voting against that version. So what we're supposed to do is then come up with a bipartisan solution. And you pointed out, Representative Jayapal, okay, this is our second resolution doing something like this. Tell me again, does it do anything to provide resources to help with the asylum cases that are backlogged?
No, it does not.
Does it do anything to provide more enforcement capacity at the border so that we can try to do better?
No, it does not.
Does it provide any more detention facilities so all the people they want to detain can be detained?
No, it does not.
Right. So, you know, the thing about the fact that this doesn't do anything reminds me of what the purpose of all this is. And it's that they don't care about solving the border crisis. They want to keep Americans angry and fearful and scared. And the Republican response to the State of the Union last week was that it was filled with lots of crazy stuff, which is, you know, Saturday Night Live can make fun of it, right? And we can all laugh at that. But for those of us who are in a position who have to come up with solutions, we can't laugh at it. Because we know that when Senator Britt describes what happened to a woman who was trafficked, and she tries to blame that on Biden, when it happened during a Republican presidential term, when President Bush was in office, we know that is wrong, and they should apologize for that. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the article, Sex Trafficking Survivor Slams Britt for Inaccurate Story in State of the Union Response. That kind of horrible statement with that graphic description is made to keep people terrified, rather than looking forward at solutions. And the reason they don't want solutions, they've already told us, right? Trump's told us, I don't want it because it will interfere with my ability to win. And Republicans dutifully did what Trump told them to do, kill that bill. I mean, is that how you see it, Representative Jayapal?
That's exactly right. I mean, for a long time, we've been hearing about secure the border, secure the border. My colleagues continue to say, we sent the Senate H.R. 2, but the Senate voted down H.R. 2, as I said, as you said, twice, and the numbers are going down. So only 32 votes this time for H.R. 2. So clearly that is not a bill that can be passed. And when the second most conservative Republican senator writes a bill and gets some Democrats to agree to that bill, not a bill that you know, I have my own issues with that bill, but all of a sudden it becomes impossible for Republicans to do anything for that bill because Donald Trump said that they weren't gonna, that they should leave this out there as a problem for the election. And that is what this has been, is a continual targeting and fear-mongering of immigrants instead of a recognition that there are, including Republican states, millions of immigrants who are doing extremely important work, despite the fact that Joe Biden has brought our unemployment rate down to the lowest level in over half a century. And we do need workers here, and these immigrants are very willing to do work. But none of the things that Republicans say recognize any of that, nor are they interested at all in a solution that could actually modernize our immigration system, could actually provide the resources that are needed for immigration agents, for asylum officers, for technology at the border. When I go to the Border Patrol agents tell me all the time that they'd like more drones, they'd like more technological equipment so that they can match what the cartels have. But none of that is something that Republicans are willing to do. And so we sit here debating these resolutions that do absolutely nothing other than target immigrants and try to put the blame on President Biden, who has done a lot of what he can do to make sure that there are actual legal pathways, and has asked for the resources to do some of the other things that he cannot do without resources.
Right, and I think that it's very interesting that, I've gone and talked to the Border Patrol officers. I'm in New Mexico. I have counties that are along the border, and they want more tools. They don't want to be babysitters. They want to be able to go after fentanyl. They want to be able to go after bad guys. Republicans aren't letting them do that because they're not providing the funds. Republicans are not providing the resources to fix this problem at the border. Let's say it over and over again. They're providing us page after page of things that do nothing. And I also find it interesting that, the Border Patrols, the union, they are not liberal. That is not a liberal union in any way. But when they vote to support that Senate bill, all of a sudden we don't need to pay attention to them. It is 15,400 people. Representative Van Orden, that's a lot of people to ignore.
Van Drew.
Van Drew,
Van Orden's
sorry.
the other guy.
Yeah, the other guy, right, Van Drew.
We don't even look alike, but I'm glad you're saying nothing burger now.
Yeah. Well, it's nada enchilada, right? And so, but that is a lot of people to now say, I'm not going to pay attention to them. When they themselves, I'm going to read it, this proposed legislation will provide the strongest set of tools we have had in decades to effectively manage migration and enhance our nation's border security. That's the Border Patrol saying that. And they're saying it was going somewhere until Trump said no. It's better for me if I can beat up on immigrants and beat up on the border, rather than getting something done. That is like the epitome of putting politics over people. It's the epitome of disgrace. Representative Jarrett, I don't know if there was anything else. There was a lot of back and forth in some of that. This might be, the last chance. I'm the last Democrat. Is there anything else that you want to add to clarify some of the conversation that we've had here?
I think the most important thing is that this resolution does nothing to actually address the situation, and that you cannot divorce an immigration system that is groaning under the weight of 30 years of inaction from what is happening at the border. You have to be willing to fix the underlying immigration system and understand that if people do not have legal ways to come into this country, then the desperation of needing to be with family members or escape horrific situations in their own countries, or be able to work, and even when they have a job already, but they can't get the visas to actually provide that, that allows for these unscrupulous actors like cartels to tell people, well, listen, if you pay us a bunch of money, we'll take you to the border. So we have to think about these two things as being interrelated. And what is very clear is that Republicans have over and over again, over the last decade and a half that I've been working on this issue, continued to block any updates to the immigration system and then use that as a way to drive xenophobia and racism and fear and try to criminalize immigrants. And it is, in your words, and words I completely agree with, a disgrace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious in this conversation, we're not going to change anybody's mind. Dr. Van Drew, and thank you for bringing this resolution up. They brought up the fact that it doesn't get the job done. It's needed to take this in front of the American people because you got a president that is not going to do the job. Would you agree to that?
I agree. It's a roadmap and a plan for action.
And are the numbers just from when Donald Trump left, are the numbers just made up of the number that are coming into this country? South Carolina has 5.2 million people. We've now got, that we know of, over between 9 and 12 million. Is that a made-up number?
Congressman, there are not made-up numbers. It's a reality, and it's significantly more, geometrically more than what existed during the Trump administration. Facts are facts.
Are the executive orders, the 93 that he did this on, is that a made-up number?
Congressman, it's not a made-up number. He made it part of his campaign. He was very active in stating that he wanted to reverse that everything that was done at the border by President Trump.
And why is Biden doing this? Why do you think, what's the goal for him to relax? And they keep, my friends on the other side said it's been broke for 30 years. We've never had that kind of influx of illegals in this country. Why are they doing it?
Congressman, we've never had it, and we got to button up the border before we can change the immigration system. And I truly believe, and again, it's been said to me by folks, and it's even, some folks have been quoted in the media as well, saying that this is going to enable to change the census, as we discussed before, which will change congressional redistricting, which will change the Electoral College, which will assume that only one side can ever win an election again.
You hit it on the head. You've been to the border, haven't you?
I have multiple times, Congressman.
I've been twice. Have you seen the cardboard with numbers on it?
I have not, Congressman.
Well, the guy talking about the plane, coming back from McAllen, we had probably about 220 seats, probably 200 of them were illegals coming in this country that the NGOs were paying for. What about the gotaways? Is that 1.8 million estimated? Is that just made up?
It's a real number. It's a real concern. It includes people that are on the terror watch list. We know we've gotten just about 300 have been caught, but numbers of others have escaped. It includes Chinese nationals that have a relationship with the Communist Party in China. We don't know why they're here, what they're doing, where they're going. And this is not just me saying it. I mean, in general, the other side of the aisle likes Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, quite a bit. And he has himself expressed extreme concern about what is happening in the country. Facts are facts. We're living in a dangerous situation and altering the actual structure of the United States of America.
And he took an oath to protect and defend this country, didn't he?
Correct.
And he's violated that.
I believe that he is, and I don't like to be mean-spirited. I try to be a nice guy, I really don't, but I believe it is purely political. I do. There's no reason to do it. Congressman, if I may, just for a second, it is making him much more unpopular. So people come to us and say, why is he doing this? Because there's a chance he possibly could lose the election because of it. He's doing it because it ensures the future politically.
Yeah, and he doesn't have the stamina or the willpower to go against the far left who say, let everybody in this country, doesn't matter who, including the Chinese nationals.
And again, Congressman, I believe that you're right. And, if you look at the old Joe Biden, not all that many years ago, was a moderate Democrat, which I don't think there's room for them anymore, but he was a moderate Democrat. His actions as president have been very left, and I believe he's controlled by others.
The bill that the Senate came up with was basically a fake bill that didn't do anything.
And Congressman, if I can answer that, the only thing worse than doing nothing would be to do that bill and pretend we were doing something.
That's what this president wanted.
Right. And I'm tired of that in Congress, and I think you are too.
That bill mandated catch and release. It required no fewer than 14,000 to be processed. I had heard 5,000 a day, but 14,000. Didn't close asylum loopholes. They could claim anything. It does nothing to it. And they just wanted this as cover because this administration knows the public has gotten, you can't fool them anymore. They see it in their cities and towns all over the country. Ms. Paul, I'll compliment you in one thing. You came here, you said it took 17 years. You did it legally, didn't you?
I did.
And what a disgrace it is. You did it legally, and many did. For those who did that, took the time, the money, and now to let everybody in this country with no holds barred is an atrocity, not only for America, because it's a I don't know what your side's going to say when the attack comes and they wipe out what many say is going to make 9/11 look small. But you said it right when you said that. I think Massey asked you about the wall. You don't think the wall does any good, do you?
Congressman, I don't think that the wall is going to solve the problem.
So it's not going to solve the problem, but what about the fence that went up around the Capitol to when the president gave his speech and we were all in the chamber? Did that do the job?
I don't think we had a fence that went up, actually. I think that was part of the problem. Are you talking about on January 6th?
The fence that when did
when this
Biden,
president,
when he did his
President
presidential,
Yeah.
his screaming match, it
Yeah.
wasn't an address, it was a political speech, and he showed he could scream and stand up for, 62 minutes, which if you take the teleprompter away from him, he would be completely lost. He can't read a thank you note on a teleprompter.
Congressman?
That being said, did the fence do the job around the Capitol? Should it have been taken down and let the pro-Palestinians come in the building? They did it. Did it not? I'm asking. Did that fence not do the job around the
Congressman,
Capitol?
We experienced
Yes or no?
a terrible event on January 6th.
No, I'm not talking about January 6th.
Where there were
I'm not-
insurrectionists who showed
okay,
up at the
I will
United
give you
States Capitol.
I will let you finish, but I'm not going to let you talk over me. Now, give me some courtesy. I will give you the same courtesy. I complimented you on doing it legally, and I got a simple question. You don't think the wall works to keep illegals out of America? I'm asking, did the fence keep those who may want to come in the Capitol when Biden gave his political speech? Did that do the job? Did it have points of entry that people had to go in? Yes or no?
Congressman, there are two completely different questions you're asking me about. Yes, I think the fence was important because we saw what happened on January 6th.
Okay, Mr. Alpert,
Congressman, you
I'm
said
not
you would
going
give
there.
me, but
Not
you
on
said you would give me
look,
the time. You
yes,
asked me a question
but I'm
about
not going to let you filibuster.
Congressman, you asked me a question about the fence around the Capitol, and so I was responding to you about why we needed the fence around the Capitol.
But not
and
a-
it came from the fact that on January 6th, we had insurrectionists who were fueled by the former president to come to the United States,
Okay, I'm gonna reclaim my time.
who killed Capitol Police
I'm reclaiming
officers
my
and
time.
injured Capitol Police officers, and so
I'm
was
reclaiming
responding.
my time. I don't just continue to talk, even though I'm the one asking the questions, and you just filibuster. You like to go off on this tangents of January 6th. The simple question, this is an immigration issue about the resolution that I think Dr. Van Drew is bringing up, which is going to remind, and we're going to keep reminding the American people of what an atrocity this administration is doing. The President Biden has no intention to do anything, and that's a fact now. So, but the analogy of the fence around the Capitol and the fence around America, I can't for the life of me see your thoughts that it's two different issues. It's just a smaller perimeter where the country will have a designated points of entry. It's paid for God's sake. It's paid for. And this president, with violating this country from a safety standpoint, and I don't know what you're going to say when the attack comes by illegals who now number on the catch and release, it's 20,000 Chinese Communist nationals in this country. 20,000. That this president has blood on his hands when something happens. And I resent it, and I resent the fact that all this talk is just nothing but talk. The American people aren't buying that. And the catch and releases and the children that are unaccounted for, I've heard various numbers, that's what's unconscionable. And that's what is the American people going to hold Joe Biden accountable for because he did it on his own. Dr. Van Drew, thank you for bringing this up, and we'll continue to let the American people know what's happening. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the chair, my colleague from Texas. A couple of points. Mr. Van Drew are you familiar with Kayla Hamilton?
I am, Congressman.
Yeah. Aiden Clark, Elizabeth Medina, Jeremy Pau Caceres, and obviously Lake and Riley. What do they all have in common?
They all have in common that they're all victims. They all have in common that they've lost their lives. They all have in common that it didn't need to happen. This has nothing to do with crime rates. It has to do with the fact if we didn't allow an uncontrolled amount of illegals to come into the United States of America, they would be alive today.
And I would add one other thing that I think brings these together being in common, or at least most of them. With respect to Kayla Hamilton, a resident of Aberdeen, Maryland, just up the road from here, who was someone who suffered from autism, 20 years old. She was attacked, raped, and beaten to death in her home in July of 2022, almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, by a 17-year-old illegal alien from El Salvador who showed up in March of 2022 and was released into the country. So we've got a release by the administration. We have, and by the way, was a documented MS-13 gang member. Aiden Clark was a 10-year-old boy in Ohio who was killed when a school bus was struck by someone who was here illegally. Elizabeth Medina in Texas, this one tends to be under the radar screen, despite the fact in December of 2023, this 16-year-old girl was found dead by her mother in the bathtub in Edna, Texas, in her home, when her mother was going out to see her perform in a local Christmas parade with her cheer squad, but she never showed up. The suspect is a 23-year-old illegal alien who overstayed his visa for the past 5 years. And Jeremy Pau Caceres, 2-year-old, right here in Montgomery County, Maryland, miles away from where we sit right now, was killed by a 25-year-old illegal alien from El Salvador, twice deported. Who was arrested for theft, was released by the Montgomery County Police Department. Now, this was something we tried to address in a bill last week, theft and ICE detainers. Shockingly, had 37 Democrats who voted for that one, which meant the overwhelming majority of Democrats voted against it, I would note. And that this individual was also someone that had been released. We have a Venezuelan national arrested in Campbell County, Virginia, for sexual offenses against a minor. Crossed illegally in September of 2023, just 6 months ago, and was released into the United States. I wonder how the parents of that minor feel about the current border security, quote unquote, policies of the current administration. August of 2023, a police officer in Chesapeake, Virginia was struck by a Nicaraguan national driving under the influence. In May 2023, Honduran national raped a teenage girl in a restaurant bathroom in Prattville, Alabama. Had a prior criminal record in Honduras when he was apprehended crossing illegally in November of 2021, but was released. I could go on. I think the point that I want to make is what gets lost in all of the numbers, because nobody can comprehend, it's like the national debt, 34.4 trillion. Nobody knows what that means. I can tell you what it means. It means it's going to be 40 trillion in the blink of an eye because this place has no ability to control itself, but that's for a different rules committee meeting. But relevant here because this body is going to vote to fund all this nonsense next week, including a bunch of Republicans, I might add. But I would point out that the releases are the key issue here. People like to try to obfuscate the truth of the numbers. They go back 20 years and they say, well, these numbers are just as bad in 1999 or 2000 or 2001, or they go pick a time when there was a decent number of apprehensions. But the truth is, I think the gentleman might know this, we served together on the Judiciary Committee. The truth is, at that point, there was a significant number of Mexican nationals that we were encountering at the border. And the fact is, the landscape has changed dramatically over time, which was something the Trump administration was dealing with, and using the powers in front of them to try to deal with it. Whether it was crafting the migrant protection protocols, Remain in Mexico policies, which were tossed aside by this administration, or whether it was, in fact, using Title 42, when that was a tool available during a health crisis, to stem the tide because there had been so many abuses of our laws. Now, something that gets lost in the shuffle, I think, again, I assume the gentleman agrees, as someone who served on the Judiciary Committee with me, that my colleagues who say that the president has no power, it's just false. I assume the gentleman agrees with that. The president has the power to deal with this. Would the gentleman like to expand on that at all?
Absolutely. The president does have the power. That's why this resolution is worthy. It lays it out. It's a roadmap of where we can go and what he can do. And unfortunately, folks on the other side think by saying something over and over and over again that he doesn't have the power, that eventually the American public will believe it. It's why we need to do this resolution to make sure that they understand what the truth is.
And I assume the gentleman agrees that the president could, for example, reassert the proper application of parole authority to be on a case-by-case basis rather than the mass parole, which, by the way, it was mass parole policies that has resulted in a good number of the releases that I'm talking about here that has resulted in the death of Americans. It is the parole policies that have been abused that led to the individual that was released through El Paso that went to New York, ended up in Georgia, and ended up killing Laken. It's pronounced Laken, not Lincoln. Laken Riley in Georgia. And those release policies, just to be very clear, I mean, these things matter. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle will gloss over this. The President of the United States and his Secretary of Homeland Security has the power to apply the law as it is written, that parole would only be processed on a case-by-case basis and not have mass parole. Does the gentleman agree?
Absolutely, and I would say that is one of the reasons we've had these tragedies, and as the gentleman knows from Texas, the other reason is because individuals who have been caught, who have been detained, are then released, commit some more minor crimes first, and in many of these cases, then go on to commit the ultimate crime.
But I think it merits making one other point, which is I do have some colleagues who have said that we don't need additional laws, and that's also untrue, because there are laws or judicial opinions or rulings that have been being abused now for at least a couple of decades that are part of the problem. So when we say catch and release, I have colleagues who have no idea what catch and release means. You use that phrase every single day because it has a English definition, like sort of a textual definition, right? Well, you catch and release them. Well, hell, we don't have a catch and release anymore. We don't even have to catch. It's encounter, process, and release. That's what we do. So there is no catch and release. It's just encounter and release. And so the catch and release, when we talk about fixing catch and release, what we're talking about is the Flores settlement. When we're talking about historically what we were dealing with in the past is fixing catch and release because we had judicial opinion that created a structure by which we were unable to deal with how we manage dealing with processing individuals and dealing with the law without being forced to deal with catch and release. So we have fixes to that legislatively. What we call TVPRA, which no one in America knows that means, dealing with unaccompanied alien children. Well, I gave an example of a dead American, an American who is dead because we processed an unaccompanied alien child into the United States, released that individual, which we're releasing by the thousands, and that individual then went on to kill an American. We have agreements under law where we are able to take an unaccompanied alien child and go to Mexico or go to Canada and process that without having to have mass releases under the excuse of our current system. We have solutions in H.R. 2 to both the catch and release problem with Flores, a judicially created problem. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle know all this. And the TVPRA problem. And by the way, it's not just my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in Congress. Jay Johnson knew this. Obama knew this. When we actually had people with whom we had violent disagreement on a whole lot of policy matters like Obamacare and everything else, we at least had someone who believed that there was law and it should be applied. And that when you had a problem in the law, maybe you should fix it. President Obama's own administration sent up fixes to those problems legislatively. Actually sent legislative solutions to those particular problems. But why am I harping on that? Because those problems pale in comparison to the blatant disregard of the law by this administration, by the president and by Alejandro Mayorkas to mass release people into the country under color of parole and asylum. That's the truth. We have had an extraordinary number of individuals get released into the United States, something in the order of magnitude of 4.5 million people released into the United States under this administration's watch. Is that not correct, Mr. Van Drew?
It's correct, Congressman.
7.5 million encounters, but 4.5 million releases. But here's the last point I want to make. Is the gentleman from New Jersey not as troubled as I am that of everything we're talking about here in terms of releases, the known gang individuals, the known individuals that we are releasing, for example, from Haiti, even as marauding bands of gangs are turning Haiti into a cannibalistic hellhole, we are processing individuals from Haiti on mass parole with very little understanding of who they are or what they bring in terms of dangers to the United States. But I can promise you that while Laken Riley's head was getting bashed in by someone that was released into the United States, and that is what happened. This young woman's head was bashed in by an individual released by the policies of Joe Biden and his radical progressive Democratic apologists, who all should have to parade through the home of the Rileys and apologize for their ridiculous policies that have resulted in the death of dead Americans, including the Texan whose mom went to go see her daughter at a parade and comes home to find her dead in the bathtub. Again, because directly as a result of the policies of this administration and radical progressive Democrats who do not give a whit about the law. That's the truth. 1.8 million gotaways. I saw a stat yesterday that there was alarm bells going off that there were 1,200 known gotaways in one day. What this administration is doing to the people of this country and endangering them is criminal. We should impeach Joe Biden tomorrow for his reckless disregard of the Constitution and the law and endangering people like Laken Riley and all of our kids and all of the people in our community. You don't need to go look at Hunter's laptop. You don't need to go down through all the complications. This president has chosen to endanger the people he was sworn to protect. That is the truth. And that is why this resolution matters. Because it is important to lay out the case and see who votes for it and who doesn't. Because the American people are watching. And they're watching and they want to know whether people are going to stand up and protect the people that they're sworn to defend. One last point, and I'll wrap up, Mr. Van Drew. Republicans passed H.R. 2 just a little over a year ago, correct?
Correct, Congressman.
And H.R. 2 would address virtually all of the issues that I just outlined, right?
It was a good bill, Congressman. Yes, it would.
It would have addressed the catch and release Flores. It would have addressed the unaccompanied alien children issue. It would have tightened the parole definitions. It would have tightened the asylum definitions. It would have made it possible to be able to detain individuals, remain in Mexico, or have expedited removal, but end the mass releases into the United States that are endangering people. Yes?
Absolutely, yes.
It would have provided the resources then necessary on top of actual legal changes and requirements on the administration to follow the law to actually have the resources necessary to process all that, correct?
Correct. It would have buttoned up the border in a relatively short period of time.
And importantly, had we just given resources, as my Democratic colleagues suggest we should do, if we just provide resources, what will those resources be used for by this administration?
Well, we know what it's going to be used for. It would basically codify illegal immigration, so it would create even quicker processing, legalize what is essentially illegal, and move more illegals into the country, probably than we've ever seen before. And as I said, Congressman Roy, before you were here, the only thing worse than doing nothing in life is to do something that isn't good and pretend that it is something.
And I believe that the gentleman, I don't know if you're aware of this, but that Laken Riley's killer is confirmed to be a gang member from the Venezuelan prison gang, one of the most violent gangs in Venezuela. That news, it was confirmed today.
Congressman, it was.
And does the gentleman agree that H.R. 2, had it been enacted, while not a panacea, would have done wonders to try to force this administration to follow the law and save lives like that of Laken Riley?
Absolutely. And the real issue here is, we can debate and we're sitting here in our comfortable chairs in our wonderful room, but the reality is those families and those individuals that were killed, they're obviously those that are killed, their lives will never be the same. Neither will their families because of our inaction.
I would just remind people that we don't have to try to scare people. The American people are appropriately concerned and scared about what's happening to their communities under the failed leadership of the current radical progressive Democratic machine in both the administration and the halls of Congress. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana for 5 minutes. Recognize the gentlelady from Indiana for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Representative Andrew and Jayapal for coming before the Rules Committee today. Sitting here and listening to some of this testimony, I've been looking at some of the executive orders. We know that President Biden issued no less than 94 executive orders which weakened border security when he took office. But a couple of them that I want to take particular note to are two executive orders that the President Biden instituted on January 20th. The first one is ensuring a lawful and accurate enumeration and apportionment pursuant to the decennial census. In this executive order, it says, the executive branch has always determined that the population of each state for purposes of congressional representation without regard to whether its residents are in lawful immigration status. So on his first day in office, President Biden made it clear that he would like to see apportionment for congressional district representation, including not just U.S. citizens, but also those that are without regard to lawful immigration status, which I find interesting, that now we're here today under Joe Biden's presidency where we've seen, I think the count now is 9 million let in under Joe Biden, maybe 7 million in the country now, 9 million encounters. Under President Trump, we heard Representative Jayapal name 1.4 million migrants came in under President Trump. Under the Senate border bill, that was going to let in 2 million a year. That is more in 1 year than in Donald Trump's presidency. But the other executive order I want to point out is Executive Order 13993. And that executive order is the revision of civil immigration enforcement policies and priorities. And in this executive order, Joe Biden repealed and revoked Donald Trump's executive order 13768, which was enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States. I want to direct your attention to Section 4, enforcement of immigration laws in the interior of the United States. Under President Trump's policies, in furtherance of the policy, I hereby direct agencies to employ all lawful means to ensure the faithful execution of the immigration laws of the United States against all removable aliens. Section 5, in executing faithfully the immigration laws of the United States, the Secretary of Homeland Security shall prioritize for removal those aliens described by the Congress in sections, and it lists the sections, as well as removable aliens who, A, have been convicted of any criminal offense, B, have been charged with any criminal offense where such charge has not been resolved, C, have committed acts that constitute a chargeable criminal offense, D, have engaged in fraud or willful misrepresentation in connection with any official matter or application before a governmental agency, E, have abused any program related to the receipt of public benefits, F, are subject to a final order of removal but who have not complied with their legal obligation to depart the United States, or G, in the judgment of an immigration officer, otherwise pose a risk to public safety or national security. Those are the provisions that Joe Biden revoked on January 20th, 2021. Now, Mr. Van Drew, would the criminal aliens who committed the heinous crimes, like the individual who murdered Laken Riley, would he have been deportable under President Trump's executive order 13768?
He would have been deportable, and that's the sad part of all this. I mean, there's so much that's awful about this, but not only the lives that were lost, but the fact that now we're going through a political process where some individuals are trying to say, who were elected individuals in Congress, oh, this isn't, the fault of Joe Biden and his administration. This is the fault because we didn't, agree to accept a very bad bill from the United States Senate that wouldn't have accomplished its goals. But to answer your question, you outlined it well. It was clear. It's awful. I wish every single American could hear this and see it. Because it's important.
So President Biden on January 20th, 2021 issued Executive Order 13993, which revoked the executive order that I just read for enhancing public safety in the interior of the United States that was instituted by President Trump. He revoked that executive order, which, in my view, Mr. Van Drew, would have kept the country much safer than we are experiencing today under the leadership of Joe Biden. Joe Biden says that he can't do anything by executive order, that it has to be, we have to take that terrible Senate bill that codifies all of his bad policies or nothing. Not even taking a look at anything in H.R. 2, that, maybe he doesn't want to take all of H.R. 2, but maybe he could take some of it and compromise with Republicans, but he's not even willing to do that. But on top of that, while he says he cannot issue an executive order, he did on January 20th, 2021, that revoked all of the protections that Donald Trump had put in place before him. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about the resolution that we're considering. I know the president was just here last week giving the State of the Union, but under President Biden, 7.2 million illegal immigrants have crossed our borders. That's more than the population of 36 of our states. It's greater than the population of our biggest city in the United States. It's certainly bigger than more than the population of the state of Indiana that I represent. Among these 7.2 million people, 169 people are on the terrorist watch list. This is an obvious national security threat on top of the chaos that the drug smugglers and human traffickers bring, as well as the transnational criminal organizations. No community is immune to the border crisis, to Biden's border crisis. In every community, in every state, this is Biden's America. Every state is a border state. So to address this, we have this resolution before us, and as I understand it, it does three things. First, it affirms that in order to help control the crisis at the border, the Biden administration has the authority to end catch and release policy, to reinstate migrant protection protocols, enter asylum cooperative agreements, end abuses of parole authority, detain inadmissible aliens, use expedited removal authority, and rein in taxpayer-funded benefits for illegal aliens. All things that could make an immediate difference on the border today, don't you think?
Yes, they would all make a difference. And the shame and the importance of it, the importance of the resolution, because I know it was mocked before, But the importance of the resolution is as many times on the other side as they say what they're saying, which in my mind is not truthful or honest, as many times as they say that, we have to, as many times, keep putting the truth out over and over. And this is the truth.
The next thing it does, it affirms that the Biden administration is refusing to use such authorities, which we have just pointed out, that the authorities were put in place under executive order by President Trump. They were taken away on January 20th by President Biden. House Republicans have long been calling on the president to take these actions, and to date, he's refused. And also, it urges the Biden administration to immediately begin using such authorities. We are the American people's representatives, and we continue to call on the president to do the right thing, and we will continue to do that for as long as it takes. I'm dismayed, I guess, that we kept thinking, I just got here, I'm in my first term in Congress, and I kept thinking, why? Why would the president want to have an open border? Why would he want to invite the drug cartels to profit off of innocent migrants and harm the American people? Why would he want to do that? Why would the Democratic Party want to do that? I thought it's either intentional or it's incompetent. And I think now we know it's intentional. Because if they count people in the census without regard to legal status, then they can change the Electoral College. They can change their apportionment for the members of Congress that represent U.S. citizens. But in doing so, they're diluting the vote and the voice of American citizens for pure power and political gain, and that should scare every American. So I hope that I've accurately represented the resolution and its purpose here today, Representative Andrew, and just wanted to close by asking you if you had anything additional to add. Have we adequately represented what the purpose of this legislation is today?
Congresswoman, you've summarized it very well to a T. And the one thing I will say, I think your conclusion is correct, and it's sad. But, one thing I will say, and I'm not being mean-spirited, you guys are smart. You know what you're doing. Democrats are really focused. You know how to win, and you are focused towards doing that regardless of what it takes. And that's what we're seeing here. This is very serious for America. It's very serious for our future. This issue is a really big issue among some others as well. These are sad times in a way for America, and we can do so much better. We can achieve greatness. What we're doing now does not do that. So I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your work on this resolution and more broadly on your work to secure the southern border. I appreciate you, your time, and your effort. Thanks for being here with us tonight. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman's recognized.
I just briefly, now we're getting into dangerous conspiracy theory mode of that the reason that we're not backing H.R. 2 is somehow we want to somehow influence the election. I think if we weren't counting migrants, I think Texas might lose a few seats. I'm not sure I'd lose any sleep over that. But the bottom line is that that's ridiculous. There's nothing in this resolution that talks about congressional apportionment or anything else. And the other thing I'm just going to say, and I say this with respect to you, Mr. Chairman, because this is not your doing, but we just spent 2.5 hours debating a non-binding resolution that does absolutely nothing. And I think that sums up the Republican Congress. And I thank you for indulging me. I yield back.
Any additional questions for our panel? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony and your exceptional patience on both sides.
Chairman, do we get overtime for today or what?
You both deserve it. So thank you again for coming, and our witnesses are excused.
See you on the floor.
I will. Thank you. Titus is ill. Yeah, I'm gonna make reference to it. I'd like to welcome our second panel, Representative Scott Perry from the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Before we begin, I just want to note for the record that Representative Titus was to be here. She's taken ill quite suddenly, and we will proceed with the hearing. I understand that we have her statement. I recognize.
And if I could ask you, and it was consent to insert into the record Representative Titus's opening statement opposing H.R. 6276, and I won't read it, but we'll just put it in the record.
Okay, without objection. Mr. Perry, welcome. It's good to have you back again, and I would welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, members of the Rules Committee. Been an invigorating couple hours here. This is probably going to be boring in comparison. Maybe that's good. And anyhow, I'm here today in support of H.R. 6276, which is entitled the Utilizing Space Efficiently and Improving Technologies Act, or short for the Use It Act, which I am proud to sponsor and which was favorably reported from the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure on December 6th of last year. This legislation represents what I think a lot of us feel is pretty common sense space occupancy standards to get federal employees back into the office, or if they're not going to be at the office, to dispose of that unused space. Last July, the Subcommittee on Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management, which I'm honored to chair, held a hearing based on a Government Accountability Office review of how agencies were actually using their headquarters space here in Washington. 17 of the 24 agencies the GAO reviewed used 25% or less of their space. One agency even admitted that if 100% of their employees showed up, they would still only use 67% of the building. Even more troubling is that some agencies were using only 9% of their space, 9%. In order to address the issue, H.R. 6276 would use similar metrics to those used by the GAO and require federal agencies to report on their actual utilization rates, set target utilization of not less than 60%, so not less than 60, and require the GSA to report to Congress if any agency failed to meet the standard. Agencies will be given time to meet the 60% utilization standard, but if they fail to do so, they would lose the excess space. Further, the bill specifically directs the Office of Management and Budget to submit a plan to Congress on consolidating agency headquarters space and selling what is not needed here in D.C. Then H.R. 6276 directs OMB and GSA to actually implement the plan. The bottom line is this: agencies should bring federal workers back, but the reality is underutilized space has been a chronic problem in federal real estate for a very long time now, is one of the reasons that federal property has been on the GAO's high-risk list since 2003. So we've been at this for 20 years now. The issues have been historically bipartisan. In fact, it was former President Obama that pushed agencies to freeze and then reduce their space footprint, recognizing that agencies had far more space than they actually needed. The Obama administration set a standard that agencies had to account for things like teleworking and actual space usage in planning for space. For example, an agency that may have 1,000 people assigned to a building, yet only a portion of those people would be counted when it came to desks and space. The Obama administration even proposed selling the Department of Labor building based on this type of space utilization and accounting. I didn't propose that. The Obama administration proposed that. More recently, I know the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia has previously proposed legislation to move and sell the Department of Energy headquarters. And based on new data that we received, which is based on cell phone data that has been used to evaluate the number of people in commercial settings, shows that last year in 2023, the daily average in the DOE headquarters was 24 people. 24. So that's down from a whopping 350 daily average in 2019, in almost 1 million usable square feet of space, which means that even pre-COVID, has nothing to do with COVID, it's pre-COVID, there was nearly 3,000 square feet per employee, which is much larger than most people's homes and space we should be easily able to reduce. So 3,000 per employee. There's a lot of homes, I'm sure, in your districts where there's a family of 4 or more in 3,000 or less. Anyhow, empty federal buildings are not only a drain to the federal taxpayer, but they also don't produce investments needed for local economies, and these older government buildings, for the most part, are far from efficient. For those who might support the goals of reducing the federal government's carbon footprint, think of it this way. For 17 of the 24 agencies GAO examined, we could potentially reduce greenhouse gas emissions for that space by 75% if we just got rid of the excess space. Now, GSA simply can't cut off the power in half a building to save the energy and reduce emissions. When only some of the building is used, we are not just paying for the space to sit empty, but we're paying for heating, cooling, lighting, providing power, maintenance, security for all the space that literally no one is in. During consideration at the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, I understand there were some questions over the interpretation of one of the definitions in the bill. As I agreed to do, I have offered an amendment along with the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Auchincloss, to reflect the fix to that issue, and I hope that it is made in order as it would actually strengthen the bill and provide clarity. So that makes it bipartisan too, which is awesome. The amendment would clarify that occupancy is based on the actual number of people physically in the building over a 40-hour work week. It would also clarify any technologies used to count people, protect personnel information, personal identified information. Now, we have an opportunity to achieve a variety of priorities here, and so I hope we can move forward with the legislation. In closing, I urge support of the bill, obviously, and the Rules Committee to grant a rule for its consideration on the floor, and I look forward to answering any of your questions. Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman for his testimony. I have no questions other than just making the observation. It certainly seems like a sensible idea to me. With that, I yield to my friend, distinguished Vice Chairman Dr. Burgess, for any questions he may have.
Well, I thank you too, Mr. Perry, for bringing this to us today. When you did the markup in committee, was this something that was supported by both sides, or did it become a partisan issue?
To the Vice Chair, it became, as oftentimes things do, a bit contentious, but when I agreed that we might be able to improve the bill with one of my friends on the other side of the aisle, I think that helped, and he actually voted for it. So I would have liked to have seen an overwhelming support of it, because it has been a 20-year problem. The Biden or the Obama administration, I thought, sought more. I think more. Would we maybe say dramatic measures? Understand, this is 60%. We're saying 60% occupancy, and we generally kind of look at things in 10% increments. So if you're going any lower, you're going to literally say half the building doesn't have anybody in it, but you're still going to staff it. So this doesn't touch anything like contracts. It doesn't touch anything like telework or any of the new flex time schedules. It doesn't apply any of that. So I think it is pretty reasonable, but oftentimes things turn out partisan. I wish it weren't as partisan as it is.
I don't disagree with you.
It might have been a line one problem, Mr. Vice Chair.
My Rayburn office looks out to the west at the Hubert Humphrey building. So it's a relief to me that we're now back in daylight savings time, not just because I suffer from seasonal affective disorder, and I do, but now I do not have to look out my window and see at 4:30 in the afternoon a dark Hubert Humphrey building with no lights on. I mean, the building has been empty for years, and I'm just so glad you're giving this the attention that it deserves. I worry about what may be going on in that building with no one working there. I think it's time we do the responsible thing. So thank you for bringing this today, and I have no other questions. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. I recognize the distinguished ranking member for any questions he might have.
So was there a hearing on the bill?
We did have a hearing on the bill, and we had the GAO come in and discuss.
And you had a markup, right?
Yes, we did, sir.
And so let me begin by saying I appreciate that you followed regular order in bringing the bill before the Rules Committee. We had a bill here last week for the Judiciary Committee that had no hearing and no markup. And I think that's a bad precedent, and was surprised that more of my colleagues on the other side wasn't bothered by that. But I do think that, and I have some concerns with this bill, and part of it is I think we're having a tough time agreeing on the basic facts of things. People can have different opinions on how to solve problems once they get to the facts, but facts are important. And I'm going to diverge a little bit, but I was inspired by Mr. Massey kind of going off topic on the previous line of questioning, so just forgive me on this. I saw you on TV the other night saying that people are paying $7.50 a gallon for milk. And I went to I was home over the weekend in Worcester, where I live, and a gallon of milk is $4.29. And what you said sounded so outlandish that I Googled like how much milk was selling for in your district in Pennsylvania. I know Pennsylvania is not Massachusetts. I don't know where that is, but in your district, it's $4.30 a gallon. And let's set aside the fact that I'm on the Agriculture Committee as well. You voted against the very provisions that help stabilize milk prices and support our dairy farmers because you opposed the last farm bill. But I found it somewhat, concerning that in my district, in your district, people aren't paying $7.50 a gallon for a gallon of milk. And I'm just concerned that we're not agreeing on the basic facts anymore. And to be fair to you, it's not you. I mean, I watched the Republican rebuttal to the State of the Union last week, and Senator Katie Britt told a story connecting President Biden to a terrible human trafficking incident. Turns out that it happened 20 years ago when George W. Bush was the President of the United States. And in fact, a woman who Republicans use as a political prop was on CNN yesterday saying that they also made up when and where her story took place. And she said that Republicans were using her trafficking story for political purposes. And look, my point here is that I'm just tired of this alternative set of so-called facts and saying that that's the reality in this country. We can't live in the same democracy if we don't all live in the same reality. And so when people say that the impression is that people are paying, kind of on average $7.50 a gallon for milk, it's not happening in my district. It's not happening in your district. I mean, I guess you could get, we could find a case where, dairy cows are being given facials and.
I pay $8.
Yeah. What kind of milk do you drink?
Raw.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, for raw milk, you can, but it's just the impression is that when people go to the grocery store, they're paying $7.50 for milk. And I mean, do you find that in your district? I mean, look, I Googled the prices in not only Harrisburg, I looked them up at the Giant in Mechanicsburg. That's $4.70. It's a little higher. The Aldi in Carlisle is charging $4.35. The Walmart is $3.67. Those are the prices today in your district.
Well, I appreciate the question and the opportunity to clarify, and I just want to say I never said average, all right, but I told people what I pay. And you can see right here, this is the Giant Food website from Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. I happen to live in Dillsburg, so I think it's actually $7.49 for me, but in Camp Hill, it's $7.59. Now, you can get some milk cheaper. You can buy almond milk. I don't think almonds are milk.
This is dairy. This is regular milk from a cow.
Yeah.
I gave you the Walmart and the Giant and the Aldi, and so I don't, yeah.
Well, I'm telling you that, sir, that when we buy milk for my family, and I know because I go to the store, the milk that my wife wants me to buy for my daughters costs $7.49, and in this case, $7.59. Now, you can buy eggs at anywhere from probably $3.50 a dozen to probably $7 or $8 a dozen. I know that because we also buy eggs, and we also supply many people in the church with eggs because our chickens lay so many eggs, and we give them to them for free.
Yeah.
But But the point is, sir, is that people are paying a lot more in the last 3 years than they did 3 years before. And when I go to the store, probably like when you do, they come up to me, my constituents, my bosses, and they say, I don't want to pay this much. Why does it cost so much?
I think you can make that point without implying that the average cost of milk is $7.50 a gallon. And I saw the clip, so yeah, I could find milk. We could find raw milk for a lot more expensive. We could find milk that is, unique to a certain farm for a higher price. But for the average person out there, when you go into the supermarket, you're not paying $7.50 a gallon for milk. And I just point that out because we're not being honest with one another about the realities that people are facing. Yeah, I mean, do I wish food costs were lower? Yeah, and I do. I want people to be able to have enough to be able to, feed their families. But it just struck me as like, oh my, and why are we? Why, to raise it the way it was raised, the impression that left me was that was what you were claiming was the average price of milk.
I didn't say average, but if you have...
Well, I mean, but you also didn't make the distinctions you
You're
just made right
invited to
now.
dinner or breakfast or lunch at my house, and I guarantee you the milk you're going to drink at our house is going to cost us $7.50 a gallon.
What is unique about the milk that you drink?
It is organic milk, and the brand is Horizon.
Organic, I mean, so we can, like I said, we can, yeah, well, for organic milk, yeah, I mean, but for regular milk, I mean, yeah, we can make choices, and we can pay more for those choices. But, I don't know, I'm a big supporter of organics, but, most of the people in my district, just shop in regular grocery stores and get the regular, yeah. So, anyway, I raised that point because I think we have a problem here, even on the last panel, where we're saying things or creating conspiracy theories that aren't real. So I could find designer milk for even more expensive than $7.50. So, yeah, he has raw milk. Well, he has raw milk. He's raw milk, and so.
None of these figures are mine, Congressman.
No, but I don't remember you saying organic on TV.
No, I didn't say organic, but it's the
Well,
milk that we
yeah, I know,
buy.
but that's the. Well, anyway, maybe you don't see my point. I'm just worried that we're going down a pathway here where we're not presenting people accurate facts about what they're facing with. But anyway, I don't have any questions. That's what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for any questions he may have.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for bringing this bill in front of us. Can you say that again? How many federal agencies have less than 1/4 occupancy?
I'll go back in the testimony. I think it's 17 out of 24 that were surveyed.
That is crazy. So what's
17 of the 24 agencies the GAO reviewed used 25% or less of their space.
So why do we need this bill? Why can't they just fix it? Why can't they just consolidate?
I think they can fix it, but it's pretty apparent over these 20 years at least that agencies don't prioritize the excess space as something that they want to grapple with. There's really no incentive for them. As long as they can keep getting it, why wouldn't you keep getting it? And so I think that they just don't spend their time doing it, and there's little incentive to do it. And quite honestly, the other thing that we found, well, I didn't find, but GAO found, is that a lot of agencies, they kind of treat it like their little kingdom or fiefdom, and they don't want to share space, and they all have to have their own dedicated headquarters, and they don't want anybody else in it. And there's probably a lot of reasons. And on occasion, there is a valid reason for special space, but even this bill addresses that specially required space and leaves an allowance for the OMB to deal with that. So I think it's just easy to keep on asking for the money, and because they get it, and they don't have to change anything, and no one's really taking them on.
So why would anybody vote against this? What are the objections to this bill?
I haven't heard any real objections. Like I said, the one gentleman was concerned about the data being used, which would potentially reveal personally identified information. We have worked with him, and we now both have an amendment. We have a shared amendment that we both sponsored to address that, and also how the employees were calculated as being present. And we also agreed that the 40-hour work week was something that we could all agree on, whether you were there, for 8 hours for 5 days, or you were there working 4 10s or something like that, but just 40 hours generally to calculate the space. And that's all incorporated in the amendment that I hope you will consider favorably.
So if they close some of this space, what happens to the space?
The space is then on the market, so to speak, for sale or reutilization by other agencies.
Well, I think that's what we need to do. In my district, they eliminated a few thousand IRS employee jobs, and instead of keeping the space forever, they shut it down, and they negotiated with the city, and the city bought this giant parcel, multiple acres in the middle of the city, and now they're, repurposing it, and it's going to be a lot better use. So hopefully when they do close these down, it doesn't take forever to sell the properties or dispose of them or give them to another government agency. But
I think generally the most of the properties that we're discussing, they're leased or owned by the federal government, so they're maintained by the federal government. They're in a state of reasonable utilization and repair, and they have a strong value because of that. They're just completely and simply underutilized at a alarming rate.
can we take the money we make when we sell those buildings and put it toward the debt?
I think that's a altogether different legislative proposal that I wouldn't be opposed to, and but that's not we're not telling the federal government how to spend its money here. We're just telling them to either use and encouraging them to use the property or dispose of the excess property.
All right, thank you very much. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for any questions she may have. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
You bring this up. There's no space being used for milk cows, were there, that you found?
The GAO did its study, as far as I understood it, in D.C. proper. So I'm not sure I've seen a lot of Holsteins wandering around the district here, but I don't know of any space that was used for cows here.
If there were space, could that bring the price down if it would let the cows produce milk, rain or shine?
Well, I just don't know about that. I better just leave that one alone. To be here in D.C., I'm not sure how versed they are at dealing with milk and cows. Thomas might have to.
But on a serious note, we do need a new FBI building, don't we?
Well,
Is that not the most ludicrous, unbelievable money, waste of taxpayers' dollars? All these buildings sitting empty, and it's all over the country, but particularly in Washington, D.C.
Well,
Building a new FBI building.
I think that's the point, if the gentleman would just allow me, is that these are headquarters here in Washington, D.C. And if the utilization rate is that low here at the headquarters, just imagine what it is. They didn't survey all across the country. Right here in D.C., 17 of 24 buildings with that lower utilization rate, and some as low as 9% utilization.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing this.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Chair. And, I don't have a big issue with better understanding how our federal real estate's been used and what is the appropriate measure to take to do it. I just wonder why we're doing this now, right, when we have so little precious time. And it strikes me that, the anger that we've seen Republicans have over so much of what's related to the pandemic is kind of like they're still mad about how bad President Trump botched the whole response to the pandemic. 4 years ago, the country was gripped by a pandemic that caused inflation because of supply chain issues, together with Putin, who, with his war, has caused tremendous inflation in gas prices. That pandemic killed over 1 million beautiful American souls. 4 years ago, Trump told us the April winds would blow it away. He told us to drink disinfectants. He failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to the American people, as we heard last Thursday. He failed the duty to care. Thankfully, President Biden won the election, and with congressional Democrats, we successfully pulled America out of that health crisis. We averted the financial catastrophe the pandemic threatened. We saved lives and livelihoods. Rather than using this horrible tragedy that the pandemic represented to come together as a nation to save lives, Republicans have spent the last 4 years complaining about everything from the vaccine to how the pandemic accelerated the way people work. And I think looking at the way we now occupy the federal buildings is one of the cases. I do have some concerns regarding the fact that every building is different, every community is different. Some of these federal buildings are in places like DC where there might be a lot of commercial places. Others are in rural areas where there just aren't options. And then some of these buildings are beautiful historic buildings that require cultural preservation concerns. So, I do take under advisement the issues that are in the Statement of Administration policy about being careful about saying, let's do the analysis, but let's not have Congress dictate what we do. That would be my one concern, and just questioning of why we're sitting here doing this. But with that, so I don't take up any more time, I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for any questions he may have.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I'll be quick because we're trying to go vote. My understanding is 17 of the 24 agencies reviewed by GAO used 25% or less of their space in January through March of 2023. Is that right? Again, to reiterate, 17 of the 24 agencies reviewed by GAO used 25% or less of their space in January to March of 2023. You already said at the time of GAO's review, some agencies were using only 9% of their space. I just want to be clear about your bill. You set 60% as a target, but when you go through, right, they have to report back, look at the metrics, and then if they're not achieving the 60%, there's still time.
Yes.
They have to work through the time, but then if not, then they lose the space. The agencies lose the space. The building doesn't get, destroyed, but the space is lost for the agency to use. The space is just sitting there empty, correct?
Correct.
To try to save taxpayers' money, be more efficient in how we're using it. If agencies aren't getting people back home, different issue, from working at home into the office, then maybe we can consolidate buildings and use that space. That's what you're getting at, correct?
That's the goal here.
Hardly a partisan question. Just say, since we had a bipartisan love fest last week to cut the FBI by getting rid of a Richard Shelby earmark, maybe we can cut this space as well. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized. All right. I want to thank you very much for your testimony, your thoughtful comments. The witness is excused.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else seeking to testify on House Res 1065 or HR 6276? Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 6276, the Use It Act of 2023, a structured rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure or their respective designees. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure now printed in the bill shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to an amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.Res. 1065, denouncing the Biden administration's immigration policies under a closed rule. The rule provides that upon adoption of the resolution, it shall be in order without intervention contravention of any point of order to consider H.Res. 1065. The rule provides that the resolution shall be considered as read. Finally, the rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motions. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule.
Gentleman is
I
recognized.
move the committee make an order amendment number 6 to H.R. 6276, offered by Representative Titus, which amends the bill's definition of occupancy to ensure that all federal workers, including those who utilize alternative work schedules as covered by federal law, are counted to get an accurate representation of the utilization rates of federal buildings and buildings leased by the federal government for federal employees.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the questions on the amendment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I ask it for roll call, Mr.
Roll
Chairman.
call's been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
We're just supposed to know.
Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Reschenthaler. Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Ms. Fishbach. Ms. Fishbach, no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Ms. Halchin. Ms. Halchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon.
Aye.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Aye. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will
Report the total.
request the total.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Any further amendments? Seeing none, the question is on the motion to report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have
That's
it.
for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Burgess.
Burgess votes aye.
Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Reschenthaler.
Aye.
Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Ms. Fishbach. Ms. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Massey. Mr. Massey, aye. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, aye. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, aye. Ms. Halchin. Ms. Halchin, aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, aye. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Ms. Leisure-Fernandez, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 3 nays.
The ayes have it. The motion to report's agreed to. Accordingly, Mr. Massey will be managing the rule for the majority.
And no one wants to do it on our side, so that goes to me.
That'd be fine.
Goes to me. I will do it.
Well, and
As long as we're talking
concludes
factually.
our business. Hearing's adjourned.